Imagine a dusty one-room schoolhouse on the edge of the American frontier in the autumn of 1901. Inside, the air smells of wood smoke and slate, and the desks are filled with children whose parents still remember the world before the railroads tied the coast to the coast. At the front of the room stands a woman named Clara Vance. She is not just a teacher, she is the last keeper of a memory that was about to be officially deleted. For 10 years, Clara taught her students about a world that doesn't exist in our modern history books, a world of massive star-shaped stone cities, sophisticated global trade networks that predated the explorers, and a technology of atmospheric energy that lit up the grand fairs of the 19th century. But on a cold Tuesday morning in October, a black carriage pulled up to the schoolhouse. Two men in formal dark suits stepped out, carrying a crate of brand-new, factory-fresh textbooks. They didn't ask Clara to update her curriculum. They gave her a choice: read from the new books or never step into a classroom again. This is the story of the last schoolteacher who taught the original history and the terrifying truth about what she was told to stop saying. The transition was not gradual, it was a surgical strike on the collective memory of a generation. Before 1901, Clara's geography lessons didn't describe the empty wilderness we are taught today. She spoke of the great Tartarian Empire, a sovereign power that appeared on maps for centuries, possessing its own flag, its own laws, and a vast infrastructure of stone and iron that spanned the globe. Her students knew about the gathering grounds, massive star-shaped fortresses located at the highest strategic points of every major city, structures that we are now told were merely ornamental or obsolete military forts. Clara taught that these sites were the power plants of a previous civilization designed to harvest the very electricity from the air. But as the new century turned, the men in the dark suits began to reframe these ruins as products of recent pioneers. They were rewriting the stones themselves. Clara Vance began to notice the inconsistencies in the new books immediately. The new history claimed that the grand Greco-Roman buildings dominating cities like Chicago, St. Louis, and San Francisco were built in a matter of months by uneducated laborers using horse and buggy. Clara knew this was a physical impossibility. She had seen the blueprints of the world's fairs, temporary cities made of staff and plaster that looked more like the cathedrals of Rome. She realized that the fairs were actually the last remnants of the old world being used as a grand stage before they were systematically dynamited and cleared away. When she pointed this out to her supervisors, the response was a chilling silence. They told her that the past was a malleable thing, and that for the sake of the new American identity, the old giants had to stay buried. The pressure mounted as the school board issued a series of Directives of Standardization. These weren't just guidelines, they were erasures. Clara was handed a list of forbidden topics, a catalog of ghosts she was no longer allowed to summon. She was told to stop saying that the massive stone obelisks in the town squares were conductors for atmospheric energy. She was told to stop saying that the Great Fire of 1871 was not an accident, but a controlled demolition of the old world's infrastructure. Most importantly, she was told to stop saying that there were 9-foot skeletons found in the mounds behind the school, the physical evidence of the people who actually built the world they were standing on. The suspense in that small schoolhouse grew suffocating. Clara started keeping a secret journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard near the wood stove. In it, she recorded the things she was forbidden to mention. The men in the black carriage returned every week, sitting in the back of her classroom, watching her lips as she spoke, waiting for her to slip up. They were the architects of a new silence. Clara realized that her classroom was no longer a place of learning, but a laboratory for a massive psychological reset. The state wasn't just teaching children how to read, it was teaching them how to forget. By the winter of 1902, Clara Vance was a woman living in a ghost world. She looked out the window and saw a landscape being standardized. The old towers were being stripped of their copper domes, the iron fences were being melted down, and the children were being taught that their ancestors were nothing more than primitive farmers. She realized that the greatest weapon of the new elite wasn't the gun or the bank, it was the textbook. If you can convince a child that they come from nothing, you can make them work for anything. The narrative of the self-made pioneer was a mask designed to cover the inheritance of a fallen empire. Clara's final lesson wasn't about math or spelling. It was a desperate whispered warning to her oldest students. She took them to the window and pointed to the granite foundations of the new courthouse, blocks that weighed 20 tons each. "Ask yourselves," she whispered, "how a man with a mule moved the mountainside." She told them to look at the star forts and never trust a map that was drawn after the year 1850. She was teaching them to see the architecture of hiding, the way the new world was draped over the bones of the old like a cheap cloth. On her final day at the schoolhouse, Clara didn't wait to be fired. She walked to the blackboard and wrote a single sentence that would haunt her students for the rest of their lives. "The truth is not lost, it is just hidden in plain sight." She walked out of the building and vanished into the mountain fog. That night, a fire broke out in the schoolhouse. It was reported as an accident, but when the smoke cleared, the floorboard near the wood stove had been ripped up and Clara's journal was gone. All that remained were the new textbooks, their pages crisp and unburned, waiting to tell a story that would become our only reality. We live in the world that the men in the black carriage created. We walk past the star forts and the granite obelisks and the grand domes, and we see nothing but what the books tell us to see. We believe that we are the peak of progress, never suspecting that we are living in the ruins of a much larger, much brighter era. Clara Vance was the last woman who tried to hold the door open, to show us that the past was a kingdom of giants, not a wilderness of fools. Her story reminds us that history isn't just a record of what happened, it's a selection of what we are allowed to know. The lesson Clara Vance died to protect is still there, etched into the very stones of our cities, waiting for a generation that is brave enough to stop reading and start looking. History didn't begin with the pioneers, it began with the things they were ordered to forget. The fences are still up, the books are still printed, but the stone remains. And as long as the stone remains, the original history is never truly gone. It is simply waiting for someone to find the loose floorboard.